Every symbol that you will see is a pagan symbol. You cannot sit and design a symbol that does not fit a pagan religion, that is not used in the pagan religions. This is the only one of the reasons why the Christian must abstain or separate himself from symbolism, merely because you can't come up with a symbol that is a Christian symbol. The symbols have all been monopolized already by the world, which uses the symbols, the world system or state system. Let's take this fish for a few minutes. What is the fish? This is the god Dagon, the fish god Dagon. Now, if you'll read back there in Samuel about when the ark was taken by the Philistines, and they brought the ark before the god Dagon, which God, of course, had fallen down in front of the ark, right? Now, this is the fish god. You will see claim, for an example, that the early Christians used the symbol of the fish. What is their proof of this? Why, if you go to the martyrs in the catacombs of their graves, you'll see the fish on the end of the so-called tombs in the catacombs, won't you? But did you ever think of this? There were none of those martyrs were in the catacombs. They were eaten by the lions. Those aren't their graves at all. It's not hard for somebody to go down and put a fish down in a catacomb. That doesn't break the Christians, the early church, using the fish as a symbol. All right? But we do know that the fish, the symbol of the fish, is the symbol of the god Dagon, the pagan god of the Philistines. Okay? Now, is it wrong to use these things? If you know it's wrong, it is wrong. If you know what that symbol is and you use it, then it is wrong. I can't go and say that a person, because he's got a fish on, therefore is not a Christian. But if he knows if he knows, and you point out in the Word of God, we're told to make ourselves no image, be it the male or female, any beast in the field, any fowl that flieth in the air, any fish that swimmeth in the sea. At least we corrupt ourselves and look to the sun, the moon, and the stars, and be driven to worship them. When you go to the mystic shrine, what does the first officer have in his pyramid on his chest? The sun. The second officer, the moon. The third officer, the stars. They see you corrupt yourself and see the sun and the moon and the stars and be driven to worship them. This is astrology, horoscopes, all sorts of mysticisms. This is an abomination unto God. Now, when we know that the fish symbol is the fish symbol of the god Dagon, and a person who knows that and wears that, and I say that this is wrong, no question about it. If it doesn't bother him, and he knows it and it doesn't bother him, then I'm kind of concerned about what spirit he has. But I can't go to a person because I have a fish and therefore say, well, you're not a Christian. I'm not going to do that, okay? So be very careful. Don't go around every time you see a symbol on somebody and come to a conclusion that he's a heathen. All right? This is maybe ignorant, but we shouldn't be ignorant. Being ignorant or willfully staying ignorant is a sin also. We should search the Scriptures daily. We should know these things and try to avoid them. All right? All I am here trying to say is that we do see these symbols, and we see as the religion becomes more apostate, the introduction of more tradition, more formality, more symbols, more ritual. Let's maybe at this point drop back in a little bit of history. And I'll do this, I was going to do this evening, but maybe I'll switch the two around a little bit because I think it will fit here somewhat. Now let's go back again and take a look at Moses. Now Moses was going down and he was going to oppose the whole power here in this world. And the whole purpose here was to separate himself, or separate these people from the pagan religion, that religion in Egypt which they were practicing. What were they worshiping? They were worshiping the bull. The bull is the fertility male symbol. All right? And they were worshiping the bull. By the way, when God took the oldest son of the Egyptians, what was this? What were these people already doing? What were the Egyptians already doing and practicing as all the pagan religions have always practiced? What happened to the firstborn son of every person worshiping the god Molech, the god Baal? What were they? Sacrificed, yes. Only God did it without any fire. You take the statues of Zeus, you see him with his arms out. The children will roll down those arms into the flames. And underneath those statues of Zeus are the bones of millions of children. You can dig them now in Africa all across. The firstborn was always sacrificed as the first fruits unto the god Molech, passing through the flames of Molech. What God did was take that firstborn without any flames. Why? Every one of the plagues that he brought to Egypt was something they were already doing, only he went one better. He outdid the priest. Now, when they got across into the wilderness, what's the thing that they sought after? The pleasures of Egypt, the things of Egypt, the things of this world, and they built themselves a golden calf, and returning to the very worship in which God had brought them away from. Now, it is this separation which is the key to the practice of God's people, which God has always commanded and always required, isn't it? Separation. And it is a separation. Now, does the world use symbols and signs? Does the religions of the world built on symbols, signs, and on practices and works? Yes. And it is not the matter of staying in and changing, but it's a matter of separating from it, which is the doctrine. Well, let's go, as I mentioned, something about what Moses, or God through Moses, created this Exodus. And of course the Slavs always protest at this time. Now let's take a look at another case. This is the case at the time of Saul or of Samuel. We'll go back in 1 Samuel and read something very interesting. Here are the people of Israel who are the chosen people, who have been given one patriarch after another by God. He has given them a priest to rule. And they sit and they watch some things happen. Two things you got to watch. One, Eli. Eli, we talk about the sin of Eli. What is the sin of Eli? Anybody here know what you mean by the sin of Eli? Yes.
He didn't raise his boys right?
That's right. He didn't raise his boys right. They turned out to be no good nicks. That's the sin of Eli. A lot of preachers around and they're preaching, and Eli preached straight. But he didn't raise his kids right. His kids turned out wrong. And this is one of the... Satan really works over preachers' kids. And preachers oftentimes are spending a lot of time running a church and running all sorts of the different problems and the problems at home he hasn't solved. He better get back home and take care of his home house first before he starts solving the problems of the congregation. Anyway, after Eli, we have, of course, God appoints Samuel. What about Samuel's sons? What were they doing?
Same thing as Eli.
No, a little different. Eli's sons were doing what? Eli's sons were worshiping Baal. Now, what were Samuel's sons doing? They were taking bribes. They were judges, and they were taking bribes, weren't they? Corrupt government. Now, let's go back and take a look at something. Anytime any people, today in 1974, anywhere else, do not feel that they can go down and take their differences before a court and get fair and honest judgment, that people become apprehensive of the future. You see, one of the keys of an orderly society, of a peaceful people, is an honest court system that punishes wrongdoing and settles reasonably fair, or at least the people feel that the courts are trying to be fair. Now, when the children of Israel took a look At Samuel's sons, they weren't worried about, and the same thing we're worried about today, isn't it? How do you go down, for example, with certain types and races and types of people and get fairness in court today? Certain people can get away with anything, can't they? What does this mean when the court system no longer will punish wrongdoers? The court system is corrupt. Well, this means that business can't operate if I can't enforce a contract and make a person pay. I can't invest in a series of chaos. It means that people now are fearful of their home or their property. They're fearful of the future. They've become a fearful people. And by the way, the American people are today a very fearful people. Versus 70 years ago, the American people had an entirely different attitude than they do today. 70 years ago, the average American person, and I'm not talking about conservative or Christian, I'm talking about the run-of-the-mill American, had a very optimistic outlook towards the future. At the turn of the century, he looked upon an age of peace. There was no nation in the world that could threaten it. No nation had the military or naval capacity to land 1 foot upon the shore of this country. They had known an era of increasing prosperity like the world had never known before in the history of the world. They saw nothing but increase in prosperity. They had known political liberty, probably one of the most just set of courts that the world had ever had. It never came across an American's mind that there could be a shortage in the land of plenty, that there could be any possibility of famine. The least thing they were worried about was population explosion. Nobody was concerned about pollution. The people were not worried about population fallout. The money was sound and there was no inflation, and they had a term sound as a dollar and had total confidence in our government, in its ability to protect them, give them honest courts, to defend them from foreign aggression, and stability and honest in a gold-backed currency. The fact is that at the turn of the century, the American people had an extremely optimistic outlook on all things. Yet 70 years later, our population has an exactly opposite view of everything. We're worried about starving to death. We're worried about running out of gas. We're choking to death from the air in which we breathe. We're worried about war, nuclear fallout. We are worried about hangnail. We're worried about every single disease, and every week the newspaper gives us a new calamity that we hadn't even imagined the week before. Why, the land of plenty, the land of peace, the land of just courts has become the land where people, by and large, across this land are living in fear of the future. They dread the future, see depression, inflation, they see unemployment, they see wars, they see all sorts of things coming. And when the people feel this way, they become very, very, distrustful of the system in which they're in, and very open to a change of the system. But let's see what they call for. Let's go back to Samuel, because in the first Samuel we have the conditions of 1974, only they are now in Israel. And what do? They look ahead and they see corrupt government. When Samuel, an old man, dies, who's going to replace Samuel? Now notice, did they have faith that God would replace Samuel with another judge of his choosing? No, the people did not have faith that God could accomplish what he had in the past. The people, through human eyes, looked at Samuel's sons, was what they saw, and they were afraid. What's going to happen when these corrupt no-goodniks become our judges? And so what did they do when they were afraid of the legal system? They went to Samuel and asked Samuel for a king. It is an amazing thing, just like when I'll mention Oliver Cromwell a little later, or George Washington, the founding of our country. What did they want to do, the people, the slobs in the streets? In both cases, they wanted to make Oliver Cromwell and George Washington king. Put a king over us. Why, they had just overthrown a king, and the next thing they asked for is another one. The first thing the children of Israel did when they got out of Egypt, build a golden calf and want the things of Egypt. This is the nature of the slob, the ordinary guy, the run of the mill. This is his nature. This is man's nature. This is your nature, isn't it? We want a king who'll take care of us, fight for us, provide for us, and give us everything. So what does God do? He says to Samuel, Samuel felt terrible because Samuel thought they were rebuking him. And God said, no, Samuel, don't feel bad because they're not rebuking you. They're not bad. They're worried. They don't trust me. They don't trust that I am going to be able to replace you. Samuel, it is me that they have turned against, not you. Samuel, tell you what you do. Give them what they ask for. You know, God sometimes does this little thing to us. You ask for the wrong thing, and he sometimes, if you ask enough, he'll give it to you. Sometimes you do this with your child. He keeps asking for the wrong thing. He's going to hurt him. Finally, after a while, you guys got to give it to him. I can remember my little brother. When I was a boy, we got an electric stove. Well, that's when electric stove first came out. Some of you people don't remember that. But back there, in those times, electric stoves were really quite something. Well, we'd always had that gas stove, that big old range with a high oven. And we got this electric stove. Well, my brother Myron did not believe that that was really hot. Why? There was no fire. There was no way you were going to convince him. He was told 1,000 times, don't touch that stove. One day he goes over and puts a hand up, and Mother just stood back. Wow! Well, I'll tell you one thing. He never touched it again. There's a time you just let them put the old hand down. I mean, you've told them 100 times, they don't learn. Well, there's one way. Right? He finally, and I believed Mom. I never put my hand on that stove because I believed what she was telling me was true. Now, Myron was a kind of a guy who just couldn't buy things like that. He had to be shown. So there's only one way to do it. And a parent sometimes does that, doesn't it? So that's what God did with the children of Israel. They wanted a king. And you'll read and see what he says to Samuel. Samuel, give him the king, but tell him what's going to happen. That king is going to take a tenth. A tenth. Is that all? Boy, I wish our king stayed with a tenth of all that you have. Take away your best men and your best women for his service, for his soldiers. And he is going to have wars. And he's going to have a draft and conscription. You know, that's what God said is going to be. When you want to go and have a king over you, you're going to have to pay the price of this king. Well, anyway, so they picked the best man, Saul, and made him king. Now, was king God's man? Yes, because he was given a new heart. He was saved, born again, regenerate, whatever name you want put on it, right? We know that. He was a prophet. Was he counted amongst the prophets, right? Saul was head and shoulders above every man. Saul was a man who had everything going. He was number one. Now, what happens to Saul? Saul was appointed king. But what does he do before the battle with the Philistines? He waits for Samuel to come and sacrifice, and Samuel doesn't show up at the time appointed, so Saul makes himself priest and takes on becomes a pope, does he not? And Saul, who was appointed king, a civil leader, now becomes a priest king as he offers sacrifice. What does Samuel do when he comes? The kingdom has been taken from thee. Now, let me go back and tell you what this all means. As I was stating the other day, Thursday, and for the couple of you who were there Thursday night, this will be a bit of a repeat. All governments are politically popular. That is, in all nations of the world, at all times, the people choose willingly to live under the government they live under. This is true in communist China, in Yugoslavia, in Russia. It was true in the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the Roman Empire, and the times of Hannibal. It was true in Egypt, in all of the places of the world, that the people in every single nation and society willingly chose to live under that government. You say, wait a minute, don't tell me the people in Russia loved communism. No, they don't love it. They complain about it and dislike it just as much as Americans complain about things going on here. Complaining about government is the natural course of men. People all over the world always complain about what government's doing, but very seldom do anything about it. Now notice, if you don't do anything about it, then you have accepted it. And if you have accepted it, it is popular. What does popular mean? That you accept it. Not whether you like it, but whether you accept it. Now, why do people accept the government that they are under? They accept the government they're under for this reason. To change any government, there is a cost. Whether you exchange it by legal democratic means or by revolutionary means, there's a cost. There's a cost of involvement, of time, of work and energy, of maybe of life and limb. But there is cost, isn't there, to resist any government. Even a smallest social injustice, to go down and protest it takes a cost of your time, doesn't it, and your energies. Every single thing, every resistance of government, no matter how slight, legal or moral, involves some sort of cost. Second, to not resist that government, that is, to submit to what it is doing, also involves a cost. The cost of the taxes, the cost of the injustice, the cost of the aggravation, whatever it happens to be. Or the cost of the expropriation of your property, or the cost of your loss of liberty. But there is a cost of submission. All right? And there's a cost of change. As long as the cost of submission is deemed by the people to be lower than the cost of resistance, people will submit. Let me repeat that. As long as the population in any society or political subdivision thereof consider that the cost of submission, which there always is some cost in all governments, is still less than the cost of change, that which they would have to pay in order to change it, they will submit and willingly accept the system as it is. All right? The moment a people in any society decide that the cost of submission is greater than the cost of resistance and overthrow, there will be a revolution of some sort, either legal or illegal, peaceful or violent, and the government will be changed. Okay? Is there anybody who hasn't grasped what I'm saying? This is very, very important to understand. Now, if I am going to increase my political power, I must increase my political power only after I have increased the cost of resisting me. And I must make the cost of resisting me always higher than the cost of submission. If I am going to be an autocrat, that is, if I'm going to take all power, if I'm going to the ultimate of political power, to be able to take whatever I want and decree whatever I wish and to impose what I want upon the people and they can do nothing about it, I must make the cost of resistance to me the ultimate cost. Therefore, what's the first thing I must know? What is the ultimate cost? What is the highest cost that I can impose upon a people? Some guesses? Taking your life? Nah, it's cheap. All of us are going to die anyway. People have died in causes all out their ages. That's cheap stuff. Freedom? No, you already got that taken away. That's why you're revolting. What? Your eternal life. Notice, punishing you in time, how long can it last? Punishing you, taking your life, so I'm going to die anyway. I don't know how I'm going to die. It might be in a plane wreck, a train wreck. It might die of old age or cancer, lay around for 6 years all in pain. Maybe I get shot in the head. I don't know, but all of us are going to die some way or the other, right? We all die of a heart attack sooner or later. That is, a heart quits from one reason or another, even if you're hit by a train. You die by a heart attack. Your heart stops. May not be any left. Anyway. The ultimate is this. If I can convince you that I condemn you forever, and you believe that Stuart Crane has absolutely the power to send you to eternal damnation, who in this room would dare raise his hand against me? No matter what I did, it would be cheaper to submit than to resist a power that you were convinced could damn you for eternity. I want to repeat that. That's extremely important to understand. The ultimate in power is to convince the public, to convince my subjects that I have the ability, or attacking me will cause their eternal damnation. Far more powerful than anything that can be done in time. This is why the Pharaoh was not a man or a king, but a man God. Why the Pharaoh was directly sent down by Osiris, and why he was God him very self. What does the word Caesar mean? Caesar means Christ, Latin for Christ. Caesar, man God. You had to worship Caesar as the living God. What about the word Kaiser? Kaiser is Caesar. He was the head of the church as well as the head of the nation. What does the word Tsar mean? Caesar, Slavic for Caesar. The Tsar was the Pope of the Russian Orthodox Church. He held the eternal destiny of every Russian in his hands. He was the high priest, the priest of the religion, as well as the king. They are priest-kings that have to have both. What about in the Dark Ages? Was not every king divine right? Where did his crown come from? It was placed on his head by the church, wasn't it? Anybody who attacked that king was attacking the church, and was attacking the Pope, and was attacking God's viceroy and God's very vicar here in this world. That person was sure of eternal damnation. A subject and a nation that fully believed that that king was created by an infallible church, with an infallible viceroy of God, a vicar here in this world, the pontiff. What does the word pontiff mean? Remember I said this morning about Nimrod being the great pontiff? The word pont means bridge, pontoon. The pontiff, the bridge, the man who gets you across from this world to the other world, the man of the river of Styx. The pontiff is the man who stands between you and the other world. And all of these pagan religions, they claim to have a pontiff, one in whom, and by whom, and through whom your salvation rests. This is true of the Emperor, I say, of Japan. This is true of the caste system in India. Every person was placed in the 3,000 or so caste by Brahma himself. You were in caste 287 or 3016. You were placed there by Brahma. For you to try to rise out of that caste would be directly attacking Brahma himself. Therefore, there was no possibility of you ever obtaining anything beyond what there is at your caste level. Your misery and so forth was allotted to you. Therefore, how could you overthrow the hierarchy, the Maharajas? How could you overthrow the elite class? Once the elite class has convinced you that they were appointed elite by Brahma himself in a reincarnation of your 4,685th life in this world. We have a person like Buddha. Now, Buddha had lived some 5,000 times before, and I've got somewhere in my literature got the number of times he was a snake, how many thousand times he was a bumblebee, how many hundreds of times he was a bird, how many times he was a people, and they got a list of all the different levels that Brahma has been for some 5,000 or more reincarnations. Now you got this sort of stuff. After all, this life is just one of the stages, and so you put up with this one. You might be a bumblebee next time. You might be lucky enough not to be a 400,000 level Hindu. You might even come back and be a free bumblebee. It certainly would be a lot better than some of these other states. But anyway, what happens to the Hindu? The Hindu with his religion. It's like I was telling you the other night. My niece came in when I was talking to my brother. We're at his house in Phoenix. And she came in with a picture out of National Geographic of one of these pathetic Hindu bundles laying in the street. A dead Hindu man, and those horrible wretches. And she came in with this picture, obviously quite disturbed by seeing it. She's about 10, 11, very impressed by this sort of thing. And she said, Daddy, she says, what happened to this man? He looks at the picture and he says, well, honey, his religion killed him. Now, most people would say, well, he died of famine or starvation or poverty or this, that, and that. No, his religion killed him. You see, there was cows right there in the background of the picture he couldn't eat because they might be Aunt Matilda. He couldn't plow the ground because he might cut a worm in half, and that might be Uncle George. He couldn't possibly subdue the earth. He couldn't kill the tiger. He couldn't kill the monkey. He couldn't swat a mosquito. He couldn't fight disease. He can't do anything. All he can do is plop. Why, with such a religion, there's no possibility of ever having anything but famine. Famine has been determined by that religion. You can pour all the food you want into India, you won't change it. You can feel all bleeding heart and send all you want over there, it won't do it. You can't build a factory in India. Do you know why? Because the guy has his position in your hierarchy. He's a foreman because of his caste. He can never be placed under a lower caste, and he can never have a higher caste under him. This means he can never advance by working hard above his caste, and he can never be demoted because of his caste. Therefore, his job is set and fixed. There is no ambition. There's no incentive to be ahead, and there's no worry about failure. So nobody needs to work at all. They're hired by their caste, and they just go there and take their job, but they don't want to work. Why? No need to. Won't do any good anyway. He can't be replaced because you can't put a higher caste in there because he would be too high a caste for the caste in which he's under the supervisor. So here, when you have a whole system of the business establishment determined by a caste system, simple, free enterprise, the industrial system cannot operate under such a system of selection of managerial and staff positions. It has to be selected on the basis of being able to produce and on merit. Otherwise, the whole system collapses. You can't industrialize India. You can build factories from one end to the other. It will not industrialize. Those companies that have been able, and very few have been able, to build a factory in India and been able to survive. There's many who have built them and pulled out. I think of a friend of mine who was a production control manager of one of the very large corporations in this country. They built 2 plants in India. They thought, boy, the labor was cheap and they're really going to make it. In 5 years, they abandoned them, walked out. No way. They couldn't get production. Now, the only people who have been able to do it are those who built a community, walled it off, taken the people in selectively, changed their religion, got them in the side of the compound, and do not let them contact the outside world. You can't let them walk out on the streets in town. Well, they can't work when they get back. They cannot be infested by the religion. The religion totally destroys their capacity to produce. All right? Now, you see what happens is this. When a man is a priest king, when he has the religious and spiritual authority as well as political authority, this is the combining of the church and state, right? There is no limit now to his political power. What happened when the Catholic Church was able to finally, the popes, be able to convince their subjects that they held their eternal destiny in their hands? You now saw the most powerful political and economic machine in the then world go into operation, didn't you? To where it ended up owning more than 1 out of every 3 acres of land in Europe was owned by the church. The wealth, the power of the cardinal was higher than the king. The king bowed to the cardinal. The priests were the ones who executed men and sent them to death in the Inquisition. It was the church that did the accusing and did the judging and had the power of arrest and of concentration. It was the church that now had the total power of economic and politics. Why? Because they had a people in which they had reasonably convinced that the church was the vehicle to eternal destiny. Now, the same is true in Japan. The same is true in every nation of the world, pagan nation. The first thing required is that the subjects believe that the ruler has the power of the eternal destiny. Remember what I said Caesar meant? God-man. When these Christians were brought into the Circus Maximus, they would be brought up to the gates. The lions are out there in the field. The stands were massed with the people coming down to see the bloodbath. And these people were asked a very direct question or a statement. They were given an order. Call Caesar Lord. Now, any Christian who would turn, or any one of these people, we can ask a question about whether they're Christian or not now, and say step to Caesar and say, Lord, was released. The only people who had to go out and face those lions are the ones who looked and turned back and faced the lion. Now, everyone chose to go out. The Romans didn't put anybody out there in their lands. Everyone who went out to face the lions chose to do so. They were given the choice. Call Caesar Lord or the lion. Which will you take? Some call Caesar Lord. Some walked out and faced the lion. You can ask yourself a question. Which way would you turn? You know, there's a question, there's a little sign around I see, maybe you've seen this. If you were arrested for being a Christian, if it ever became illegal in this country to be a Christian, and you were arrested for being a Christian, is there enough evidence to convict you? If there isn't enough evidence already on the docket, something's real wrong. Your dossier should be a mile long. And they should have enough evidence on you to convict you 1,000 times over. Maybe it's because most Christians aren't convicted to begin with. We could just, ponder that little one. Well, let's go and take a look at the Caesar. Why out of all of the thousands of sects did they pick these Christians to face the lions? After all, what did the Christian religion teach? Obey Caesar, render unto Caesar what is his, fight in his army, obey your masters, submit to your masters. By the way, what objection would you have to that? Pay your taxes, be a good citizen, obey Caesar. This is what was required, wasn't it? Why, you would think Caesar would say, boy, isn't that a great religion? All the people got to obey me. Oh, no, it wasn't. Why? There was one thing wrong with Christianity. They could not worship Caesar. They had to render unto Caesar those things that are Caesar's, as a king and a ruler and a master. But only temporal things could be rendered unto Caesar. No spiritual things could be rendered unto Caesar, for he had to render unto God that which was God's. What did that mean? If Caesar could not be God and have eternal destiny of his subjects in his hands, he was limited in his power, what he could do before he got overthrown. In other words, Caesar could only go so far. That in which imprisonment would take care of, that in which threat of death would take care of, but he couldn't go beyond that. Because every one of these Christians felt that their eternal destiny was already settled in heaven. It was settled at the cross. If that's settled at the cross, what are you going to do about it, Mr. Caesar? That's what these people were saying when they faced the lions. All right, Caesar, here in this world, we've obeyed you. If you want to put us out there in the lions, we'll go. But no worship to you. Because our destiny is not going to be settled by Caesar, Christ man, God man, up there. But it's been settled by the real Caesar, the God man on the cross. What happened when these people walked out and faced those lions? Those were the greatest sermons ever preached. Those people may not have known 3 words to preach in sound, but made no sounds, really. Didn't need to. They didn't stand there and preach. The fact is 120,000 sat in the Circus Maximus watching those people face lions. There's a question in every head. Why? What is it that makes a man walk out and face a lion rather than call Caesar Lord? Why won't these? Everybody else calls Caesar Lord. Everybody else recognized him as a pontiff, as the viceroy, as God's vicar, as Osiris's son right here in this world. Why? Why these nuts? What happened was, of course, that the conversions in the stands were far greater than the lions could ever eat. It was one of the greatest revivals and gospel preaching times of all history. You know, most Christians don't look at those things as times of the... You know, it's the church. The Christian church has never been great except under persecution. Its power is only under persecution. Because then you separate the men from the boys. You separate those people who say, the Jesus freaks, and the people who want to just say the name Jesus, and that's it, from those who really have something real. and know in whom they believe it. Anyway, the fact is that the Roman Empire shook. Here's a couple men, Paul and Silas, gone across Asia Minor. In human eyes, they certainly had less chance than even Moses had, didn't they? At least Moses had been in the palace and knew his way around. But here's old Paul and Silas. They're out there walking along there, just two guys against all of the wisdom of Greece. The greatest period of wisdom the world has ever known. This is when the wisdom of Greece, Socrates and of Plato, and the answers to all things had been established in the great academies and universities. Against all the might of Rome. At no time in the world has so much of the world, then known world, been ruled from a central state as it was at that time. The most powerful empire of all time. Mighty, absolute, total authority. Most pagan and most pornography you've ever wanted to imagine. In every temple. Let me just say a couple things. I'm going to have to drop off of this. In every temple and home, the reproductive organs were displayed, and the pagan religions, the open worship of all of the pornography that we see today was not only in the drugstores, it wasn't only in the movies, it was in every temple. Practice openly on the altars before all people. And every parade in the streets openly. We have not yet reached the pornography and the moral degradation that Paul and Silas were walking out against. Now, we were talking about the religions, the power, the absolute power of the pagan religions. The life and death in the power of the priests of that day. What chance did Paul and Silas have? Let's take their numbers. Look in the human eye. What chance did they have? Yet in a few years, what was Caesar saying? These men are turning the world upside down with their doctrines. Now, the powerful thing in the world, the most powerful thing here is doctrine. Be very careful of your doctrine. The doctrine. It is not preaching a gospel, but the gospel. Variations of the gospel are not the gospel, they are a gospel. Versions of God's word are not versions, they are perversions. There's only one version of God's word, and that's the Bible, and there cannot be two. For not one jot or one tittle can change. Heaven and earth will pass away, but his word shall endure forever. If you've got two versions of the Bible, you know at least one is a perversion, if not both. They both cannot be the Bible. There cannot be many versions by the Bible's own statement. All right? Well, we'll get off that one. Let's go back for Saul before I go on beyond Paul. What was the crime of Saul? Saul had taken over the position of priest king. He had done the very thing, you see, the Caesar was going to do. He had done the same thing the Pharaohs had done. He had the audacity. He was elected what by God? Chosen to be whom? King, not Christ. What was he doing? When he sacrificed for the people, he took over a priestly function that God had not given him. And we had the man God, yes.